Welcome everyone to my channel. Today I present to you the second of several backstories based on the camping nightmare Lost in the Woods. The story I wrote that featured Cyrus the Bigfoot. These stories will round out the story about Cyrus' life from the perspective of each character and add depth to him. There is so much we don't know about these creatures, so this series is intended to let our imagination see things from their perspective, and just maybe, how they might perceive life in our world we share. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification, share, and give this a thumbs up. Please enjoy the second part of Eunan, father of Cyrus, as we get right into it. Sorma led me down to the closest cave with hot water. She tended to my wounds as I told her about everything that happened to me. She was in shock that I was the son of Eunan the Great. She told me that I needed to be careful because other older males had been jealous of the power and authority that my father had. Since I was his son, they might make trouble for me. I didn't know it at the time, but her advice would save my life. Over the next many moons, Sorma shows me around all the mountains in the territory. Here is much different from where I came. Even the food is a little different. I take my time to adjust and build my own dwelling place on the edge of another family group. As I get to know Sorma, I grow an affection for her, and she for me. We decided to become mates. She left her parents' dwelling and came to mine. Her mother was happy, but her father, Nakna, was not. He was actually quite upset that I was even here. He didn't want Sorma having anything to do with me, but thankfully, she didn't listen to him. So we started our lives together. About 100 moons later, Sorma's mother came to us and warned that Nakna, her father, Jackrai, the current leader of the whole territory, and another male were inciting a frenzy against me. There were numerous males that were out to get me because of my father. Sorma had warned me about them, and I stayed clear of them, hoping that they could see me for who I was, not from where I came from. But they didn't. The next day, early in the morning, a male from a neighboring territory named Helnak came to my dwelling and yelled for me to come out. He said, "Son of Eunan the Great, come out of there. We leaders have something to discuss with you." I told Sorma to stay put while I went out. He looked visibly irritated. I asked what it was. He grabbed my arm and said, "Silence! Follow me." He led me off to the territory's meeting tree on the edge of a ravine where the water flows. This is also the lookout point to see the land of banishment at a distance. There at the tree was Nakna and Jackrai, and behind me was Helnak. I asked what this was about. Helnak spoke up and said, "We have been discussing amongst ourselves what to do with you. You are the son of Eunan the Great, and you have done nothing but disrupt the peace of all the older males. Your father was a haughty, pompous dictator of a ruler, and self-proclaimed ruler of our entire species. We had gotten along just fine before him, and we will do so after him. You are his son, and the law of the forest dictates that you take his place as ruler. However, we don't need you, nor do we want you as our ruler here. Jackrai is the leader of this territory, and that's how it will stay. You must leave this territory by darkness." I told him that I am not my father, and if someone is upset with my father, that has nothing to do with me. I could sense their blind anger, and that nothing I would say would calm them. I then told them that I would leave, and Sorma and I would go to another less hostile territory. Her father, Nakna, immediately piped up and said, "No, you must leave. Sorma will not be going with you." I must have looked at him with confusion. He then said again, Sorma stays, but you go. I looked at him in the eyes and responded, if I go, I'm taking my mate with me. There's nothing you can do about that. He rushed right up to my face and yelled, hear me loud and clear. You will not be taking Sorma anywhere. If you don't leave, we will remove you, or worse. Both Helnak and Jackrai took a step forward towards me. I repeated again, I will not be going anywhere without Sorma, and that's that. He grabbed me by the neck and slightly squeezed and said, well, I guess we have a problem then. Disobeying direct commands from an older male leader is grounds for ending. I simply responded, how can you be a leader over me when you all have not even accepted me? Apparently, all that response did was anger him more. Helnak piped up and said that the only way I could stay was to fight the current leader until one of us was ended. I knew it wouldn't be a fair fight. Thankfully, my father taught me a little bit of skills while I was still in my very young times, and then other males who directly trained with him trained me. I responded, if that's the way it has to be, then so be it. Jackrai snickered, and Nakna just grinned at me and said, the fight will be after the midday feeding. That was barely long enough for me to formulate a plan and get back to Sorma to tell her what was going on. Sorma started crying, begging me to figure out another solution. She knew, though, that if we left, her father would hunt me down, and me just leaving on my own was no guarantee that the issues these males had with my father would be over. I felt I had no choice. I didn't want to fight, but I had to. So I made my way back to the meeting tree. There, all three of them were standing along with about a dozen of the other older males from this territory, and some from Helnak's territory. All of them seemed to look down on me. I was most definitely the underdog in this. Jackrai took a few steps towards me. Now, keep in mind that I'm about 9 heads tall, and Jackrai is an enormous 11 heads tall. He outsized me rather considerably. That being said, the fight was to begin. He started running towards me full force as I started running towards him. As we collided, it felt like getting hit with a tree. He tackled me straight to the ground, stopping me completely in mid-run. He landed punch after powerful punch straight to my face. I got him several times in his side and stomach. He balled up both fists and went to hit me full force, flat-fisted on the face. But I wiggled to the side some, and he missed. As he hit the ground with his fists, I wrapped my arms around his chest, just over the shoulder, and locked my fingers together. That was a technique my father taught me all those moons ago. His arms were stuck in front of him, and he started swaying side to side to break free. I let him go, and as he went back to his knees to gain his bearings, I kicked him right in the chest. It hurt him some, but not as much as I had hoped. He stood up, and I was trying to get to my feet. Then he wrapped his arms around my neck. He started squeezing. The only thing I could do was put his eye out. That I did. He immediately let me go and dropped to the ground. I could barely breathe because of how strong of a grip he had. He had his hands on his face because of being in so much pain. I managed to get up and start running towards him. Out of nowhere, a branch flew in front of me and hit me in the chest, knocking me down. It was Helnak trying to give Jackrai time to come back at me. I looked over at Nakna, and he just grinned at me again and lifted his chin up, as if what was happening was fair. I got back to my knees and faced Helnak, and he smiled at me. As he smiled, Jackrai grabbed me from behind and lifted me up and threw me straight into the meeting tree. I knew I would be ended soon if I didn't do something drastic. I became filled with anger at what was happening and the thought of Sorma losing me. I balled up my fist and punched the meeting tree so hard that I split it in half. All the males, including Jackry, paused and gasped. I now meant serious business. I could feel my strength returning, and I broke off a branch and threw it straight at Jackry. He ducked, and it flew past him and off the edge of the cliff. Hellnack came up and hit me full force in the back. I dropped down face first to the ground. Jackry came at me, and with all my might, I lifted up and swung my leg around full force and kicked him directly in the stomach. He stumbled back a couple of paces and fell backwards. As he fell backwards, he was on the edge of the cliff. He reached out and grabbed a hold of a rock as he went over the edge. Unfortunately, the rock was loose, and Jackry fell the 60 paces to the bottom of the ravine. I was on my knees, beaten up and in so much pain. I never meant for any of this to happen. As I was there in disbelief that I had just ended the leader of the territory, Hellnack grabbed me from behind and pulled my arms behind me. I was losing strength and couldn't resist much. Nakna grabbed a branch from the split meeting tree and walked over. Hellnack yelled for him to end me. Nakna lifted the branch and looked at me in the eyes. His face was full of anger and hate. So I said before he ran me through, "Is this what you're going to do to the father of your grandchild?" He stopped and said, "What did you say?" Hellnack yelled not to listen, but he silenced him and asked again, "What did you just say?" I repeated, "Is this what you're going to do to the father of your grandchild?" His face immediately softened, and it turned to confusion and regret. He told Hellnack to let me go, but he refused and yelled again to end me. This time, Nakna rushed to Hellnack, grabbed the back of his head and held the branch up and repeated, "Let him go now." He let me go and stepped back. I dropped to my knees and grabbed my shoulders because of how hard he pulled. Nakna told me to stay here and not move. He left and immediately went to our den and confirmed that it was true with Sorma. She followed him back to where we were and saw me so injured on my knees. She rushed up to me and gave me a hug. Nakna spoke up and said, "We have accomplished what we came here for. He defeated Jackry, and thus he is allowed to stay." Some of the males started chattering about who would be the leader of us now. Nakna was about to say something, but in that moment, a voice I had not heard in many moons came out from behind the now large group that formed. "He defeated the leader, so he will become the new leader." Several of the males jeered that it was impossible. Much to my delight, my sister Moa stepped forward, and everyone went completely silent. She said, "He defeated your leader in an unfair battle, and thus displayed all the characteristics of a true leader. He showed integrity and a desire for peace, but you all did not want it. He is also the only living son of Jiren the Great, and the law of the forest dictates that he become leader of this territory. He must become leader over all of you here, and if you defy him, you will answer to the current ruler of all of our species in the earth, me." Apparently, the other male who became leader died, and the oldest of my father's children was to become the ruler, if they were old enough. She came up to me and helped me up, and told me, "Well done." Hellnack was so angry and yelled that it couldn't be true and I must be done away with. I then said, "My first act as leader of this territory is to banish you from ever returning here. You must never cross over to this territory again. Go back to your own territory immediately." He scoffed and looked around at the other males. All of them looked at him and nodded their heads in agreement with me. He snorted and turned around and ran off. Sorma, Moa, and I went back to the den to catch up. As Sorma tended to my wounds, Moa told me about all that happened since I left. Mother was no more because of grief from missing father so much. I couldn't even say goodbye. Moa told me that Mother never stopped loving me and talked about me all the time. That made me feel a little better, but I still wish I could have talked to her one more time. Moa stayed with us for 3 moons and then returned back to her home. Just before dark, Nakna came to me and apologized for taking his anger out on me. He was actually jealous of my father and let it build to the point of hate. I told him that I harbored nothing against him. We came to peace with each other and moved on from it. Some time passed, and Sorma was heavy with offspring. She wanted to go get some flowers for our den, so she went off to the flat area where the wildflowers grow. As she was picking some, she heard some noises in the distance. She ducked down to hide in the tall grass and peeked up to see that it was some humans. She knew she needed to get out of there, so she walked on her hands and feet to stay concealed. She made it back to the den and told me how close humans were. We were on high alert. I hated the idea of humans being close, but thankfully, they left and never came back. Several moons later, Sorma gave birth to a young female. It was smaller than normal and appeared sick. She nursed the offspring to give it strength. Unfortunately, we had a very strong winter, and the young one was too weak to survive. She was no more after only 50 moons. We all grieved her being gone. We all blamed ourselves in some way, but it was something no one could stop. We grieved for many moons, and to some degree, Sorma still grieves even now. Several hundred moons pass, and she would now be having another young one. She gave birth to a healthy male young one that we named Zinnik. He was large and strong for such a young one. Nakna was so proud to have such a big grandchild. Nakna, unfortunately, was no more later on in the year because of being sick. He stopped eating and couldn't fight it. We buried him beside our lost offspring. We grieved him for several moons. Life was regaining some peace. Zinnik was growing and getting stronger every day. He was very unruly and didn't listen very well. I knew we would break him of that one day. About 100 moons after Nakna was no more, Sorma was now going to have another offspring. She gave birth to another male. He was a little smaller than Zinnik, and that made her very concerned. But she held him and said that even though he was smaller, he would be more powerful than any one of our species has ever seen. She named him Cyrus. When he was only 20 moons old, humans with outer skins that looked like leaves and with metal weapons broke into our dwelling place. They took Cyrus and another young one as I was fighting off several. I spent many moons hunting them down and finally found Cyrus in a very strange human dwelling. I never found the other young one they took. I got Cyrus back. They had done things to him that we hoped he would forget. We focused on teaching our ways to him to help him forget what the humans taught him. It seemed to work. Cyrus grew up with Zinnik, and they got along until they got older. Cyrus was very curious and extremely intelligent, and Zinnik was stronger and more uncontrolled. One day, however, I found out that he didn't forget everything the humans taught him. I caught him fighting a cougar to defend some humans, and then before I could get up there, he made communication with them by writing their words in the dirt. I yelled from a distance to get away from them, and they are dangerous. He got up and ran away. His curiosity had almost cost him everything. I had to tell the older males what happened, and they said the law of the forest dictated that he be banished for it. I knew I had to be the one to do it, So I sent Zinnik to get Cyrus and bring him here. Cyrus started arguing with us about the law, and Zinnik, in his uncontrolled reactions, started fighting with Cyrus. Cyrus broke a branch off and knocked Zinnik out. He broke the meeting tree and did that to his own species. I had done something similar, but it was out of defense. Cyrus did it out of anger. And not only that, he pierced my side when I tried to break it up. I had no choice but to banish him. He left and stayed away for many hundreds of moons. I would have a trusted hunting male check on him from time to time to make sure he was alive. He told me about how he defeated Kelkar and stopped a fight with his once best friend, Thadden. I knew that he was showing the same heart that my father showed, but in a stronger and more peaceful way. I knew my son just might change our species for the better if he had a chance. These were things I was thinking to myself. One day I was foraging for berries, and out of nowhere, a stick flew through the air and pierced me right through the chest. I cried out in pain. Up in front of me, about 100 paces, was a human holding more sticks, and it seemed like he was going to throw more at me. I ran off as fast as I could and lost him in the forest. I made it back to the den and dropped to my knees before getting inside. Sorma and Zinnik came out and got me inside. Another female came in and helped Sorma get the stick out and tend to my wounds. I could feel myself getting weak and sick. A couple of moons passed, and I was not getting better. I call in the other older males to my den and tell them everything I had been thinking and my desire to restore Cyrus back to the territory and make him leader. They agreed he was the best choice over Zinnik. I asked Zinnik to go get Cyrus and bring him back so I could see him. Zinnik was the fastest of the males, so I sent him because I felt time was against me. Right now, I'm waiting for them to return. I just hope Cyrus gets here in time so I can tell him the news myself.